It began on a quiet Thursday morning, June 25th, 2009. The kind of morning when Los Angeles looked golden and endless sunlight spilling over the hills, paparazzi already waiting outside the gates of the rich and famous. But inside one mansion, behind closed curtains and drawn blinds, the world's greatest pop icon lay motionless on his bed. Michael Joseph Jackson, the king of pop. A man whose music transcended race borders and generations who had for decades seemed both immortal and unreachable was now suddenly impossibly still. At 12:21 p.m., a 911 call went out from a rented mansion on North Carrollwood Drive in Holmby Hills. The voice on the other end sounded frantic, desperate. "We have a gentleman here who needs help. He's not breathing. We're trying to pump him." The dispatcher asked, "Is he on the floor?" "Yes, sir. He's on the bed. He's not responding to CPR." When paramedics arrived minutes later, they recognized him instantly. They all did. His skin pale, his frame frail, his heartbeat gone. Michael Jackson, 50 years old, rehearsing for his big comeback. "This is it," was declared unresponsive. As the ambulance sped toward UCLA Medical Center, the world's gossip machines were already spinning. Someone had heard he'd collapsed. Someone else said it was a heart attack. Another whispered the word overdose. Outside the hospital, crowds began to form, fans clutching posters, journalists pressing against barricades, faces anxious and pale beneath the California sun. By 2:26 p.m., the announcement came. Michael Jackson was dead. The shockwave was immediate, global, and intimate. People cried openly in Times Square, Tokyo, Paris, Rio. Television stations cut into regular programming. Radio DJs wept on air. It was the end of something larger than fame, the end of a myth that had lasted since the 1970s, when a boy with a voice like liquid gold sang, "I Want You Back," and made the world believe in innocence again. But as the tears flowed, so did the questions. What really killed Michael Jackson? How could a man with endless resources, with doctors and staff surrounding him, simply die alone in bed? Was it an accident, or something more deliberate? In the hours after his death, as helicopters circled above and reporters swarmed the gates, another kind of story began to form, one far darker than anyone wanted to believe. Inside his bedroom, police found medical bottles scattered on nightstands, V-bags hanging from stands, and vials labeled with the word propofol, a surgical anesthetic never meant for home use. The room looked less like a pop star's suite and more like a private hospital ward. And at the center of it all stood one man, Dr. Conrad Murray, a private physician paid $150,000 a month to keep Michael alive, healthy, and ready for his upcoming concerts. He had been the last person to see him alive, and the first to find him unresponsive. In the hours and days that followed, Dr. Murray's behavior raised eyebrows. His timeline didn't match his actions. His calls during the critical moments seemed suspiciously delayed. And soon whispers began that Michael Jackson had become dependent on a dangerous cocktail of sedatives and painkillers, and that Murray might have crossed the line between treatment and addiction. Still, no one wanted to believe it. Not the fans who saw Michael as fragile but pure. Not the family who had seen him struggle but still thought he was invincible. And certainly not the world which had crowned him king and wanted its fairy tale to last forever. But truth, as always, comes dressed in contradiction. Michael Jackson had lived most of his life in the glare of cameras, yet his final years were hidden in shadows. Behind the glitter and moonwalks, there were secrets: insomnia so severe he hadn't slept properly in years, chronic pain from decades of performances, and a dependency on doctors who promised relief at any cost. As investigators began peeling back the layers, they would find a story not of a simple overdose, but of systemic neglect, a web of enablers, pressure, and profit that may have pushed a man to his breaking point. Michael's death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a mirror reflecting the cost of fame, the corruption of medicine, and the fragility of human perfection. Because this wasn't only the story of how Michael Jackson died, it was the story of what killed him long before that fatal June morning, a slow erosion of trust, identity, and peace. The king of pop had once asked, "Will you be there?" In the end, it seemed no one truly was. What really happened behind the closed doors of that mansion? What role did Dr. Conrad Murray and perhaps others play in Michael's final hours? And why years later does the full truth still feel just out of reach? To understand that, we must go back. Back to the beginning, to the boy who became a legend and the legend who became a ghost of himself. Long before his name became synonymous with scandal and tragedy, Michael Joseph Jackson was something far more innocent, a child prodigy from Gary, Indiana, whose voice seemed to come from another world. Born on August 29, 1958, the seventh of 9 children, Michael grew up in a tiny two-bedroom house where music wasn't just a pastime, it was survival. His father, Joseph Jackson, was a steelworker by day and a strict-driven bandleader by night. Under his watch, the Jackson brothers became a disciplined musical machine. Mistakes weren't tolerated. Every missed note, every sloppy move was met with punishment. Michael, though, had something special. Even at age 5, his voice was haunting, sweet, yet aching, carrying the emotion of someone far older. His stage presence was magnetic. When he sang, people listened. When he moved, crowds erupted. By 1969, the Jackson 5 were signed to Motown Records. Their debut single, I Want You Back, rocketed to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. For a moment, America had found its new golden boy, the perfect blend of innocence and soul joy and rhythm. But behind the smiles and synchronized dance moves was a child who never had a childhood. While other kids played in the streets, Michael was rehearsing. While his classmates dreamed of summer vacation, he was performing on stages across the world, his youth slipping away under the glow of stage lights. By his teenage years, Michael's fame had already outgrown his brothers. He began to carve out his solo identity, and by the time Off the Wall released in 1979, he was unstoppable. Then came Thriller, released in 1982. Thriller wasn't just an album, it was a cultural earthquake. The videos redefined music television. The choreography inspired generations. It sold over 66 million copies worldwide, becoming the best-selling album of all time. Michael had achieved something no other artist had. He had become both a pop phenomenon and a mythic figure. But with that level of fame came isolation. The more adored Michael became, the more alone he felt. The same world that crowned him a genius now scrutinized every move, every word, every change in his appearance. In the 1980s, the transformation began. His skin grew lighter, later revealed to be due to vitiligo, a skin condition that destroys pigment, but tabloids spun it as self-hatred. His face appeared slimmer, his nose more refined, his voice softer. People called him Wacko Jacko, a cruel nickname that haunted him for decades. Still behind the eccentricity was a man desperately seeking control over a life that had never been his own. Michael surrounded himself with symbols of the childhood he'd missed: a private amusement park, a zoo, a fantasy estate he called Neverland. He spoke often of Peter Pan, the boy who never grew up. To him, Neverland wasn't just a home, it was a refuge, a place where he could escape the cruel gaze of a world that demanded he stay perfect. But the price of that perfection was heavy. By the 1990s, cracks began to show. The physical toll of performing from intense choreography to pyrotechnic accidents left him with chronic pain. His scalp had been severely burned during a Pepsi commercial shoot in 1984, leading to years of reconstructive surgeries and pain management treatments. Doctors began prescribing medication, opioid sedatives, muscle relaxants. At first it was to manage pain. Then it became a way to manage stress, then insomnia, then the weight of fame itself. Friends and family noticed the changes. He became more withdrawn, more fragile. His nights stretched into long, sleepless hours. For Michael, sleep became a stranger. He once confessed to an associate, "I just want to sleep. I can't shut my mind off." And so began his dangerous relationship with propofol, a powerful anesthetic normally used in hospitals, not bedrooms. Administered improperly, it could stop breathing within seconds. Michael called it his milk. Doctors would later testify that he believed it was the only thing that could give him the deep rest he craved. By the early 2000s, Michael was no longer just a superstar, he was a symbol of contradiction. The man who gave joy to millions lived in constant fear. The artist who broke barriers had become trapped inside his own walls. His 2005 trial for child molestation, though ending in acquittal, shattered what remained of his public image. The years of headlines, humiliation, and legal chaos drained him emotionally and financially. He became a recluse, moving between Bahrain Island and Las Vegas, searching for peace that never came. Then in 2009, a glimmer of redemption appeared. This Is It, a massive concert series in London, billed as his grand comeback. 50 shows, sold out in hours. Fans wept with excitement. The world was ready to see him return. But behind the promotional posters and rehearsals, Michael was exhausted. The grueling schedule, the perfectionism, the physical demands all bore down on him. He told friends he couldn't sleep, that his mind wouldn't rest. He told his doctor he needed help. And that doctor, Dr. Conrad Murray, would soon become the most pivotal figure in Michael Jackson's final chapter. By the time rehearsals reached their peak in June 2009, Michael was balancing on the edge between triumph and collapse, between sleep and death. The boy from Gary, Indiana, who had once conquered the world, was now fighting to simply make it through the night. And the forces surrounding him, the money, the pressure, the enablers were about to push him past the point of no return. June 24th, 2009. Michael Jackson stood on the stage at the Staples Center in Los Angeles, his final rehearsal. He was slender, almost ethereal, dressed in his signature black pants, silver jacket, and mirror shades. His movements were sharp but fragile, his body seemingly guided by muscle memory more than strength. Behind him, dancers mirrored his every move. The orchestra roared to life as he sang Earth Song. For a moment, it felt like the magic was still there, the same electricity that had once set arenas on fire. The crew applauded. Choreographer Kenny Ortega said later, he was happy. He said, "I feel great." But beneath the applause, something else lingered, a quiet sense of fragility, as if everyone knew, even subconsciously, that this comeback demanded more than his body could give. That night around midnight, Michael returned to his rented mansion on North Carrollwood Drive. The house, sprawling and white, sat behind high gates, guarded by security cameras and staff. Inside, the lights were dim. His children, Prince Paris and Blanket, were already asleep upstairs. Dr. Conrad Murray was waiting. For weeks, he had been staying in the home, managing Michael's insomnia and administering medication, a nightly routine that had become disturbingly clinical. Jackson would ask for milk, his private code for propofol. Murray would prepare it, often combining it with other sedatives like lorazepam or midazolam, all potent drugs designed to relax the body and silence the mind. That night was no different. Around 1:00 a.m., Murray began giving Michael small doses of medication to help him sleep. Lorazepam first, then midazolam. When that failed, as it often did, he eventually administered propofol, the white milky anesthetic that Michael believed could give him what he called real sleep. But propofol isn't sleep. It's controlled unconsciousness, the kind used in surgeries where every breath must be monitored by machines. It was never meant for a bedroom, never meant to be handled outside a hospital. By 2:00 a.m., Michael drifted off. His breathing slowed, his pulse softened. Murray, by his own account, sat beside him, monitoring his pulse manually, without proper equipment, without oxygen, without a nurse. Sometime after 11:00 a.m., panic erupted. Phone records later showed that in the crucial window of time between 11:51 and 12:05, Murray made a series of phone calls to his girlfriend, to patients, to business contacts. None to 911. At 12:12 p.m., paramedics were finally called. The 911 operator's transcript was chilling. "He's not breathing, sir. Did somebody witness what happened?" "Yes, our doctor's here. He's the only one here." When paramedics arrived, they found Michael lying on his bed, still connected to an IV line. His body was warm but lifeless. Murray was performing CPR, though improperly, on the bed, not the floor. The room was cluttered with medical paraphernalia, vials, syringes, oxygen tanks. One paramedic later said, "When we saw him, we all recognized him. But it didn't register, not right away. It was Michael Jackson, and he was gone." They worked on him for more than 40 minutes. No pulse, no response. Finally, they transported him to UCLA Medical Center. The scene outside had already exploded. Helicopters hovered, reporters gathered, fans pressed against barriers. At 2:26 p.m., the attending physician pronounced him dead. Inside the hospital, family members arrived: Jermaine, LaToya, Catherine, his mother. The grief was indescribable. They were told he had suffered cardiac arrest. They were not told, at least not yet, that propofol had been found at the scene. Outside, the world stopped. News networks interrupted broadcasts. Michael Jackson dead at 50. It didn't feel real. It couldn't be. Twitter crashed from the surge of traffic. Radio stations played Billie Jean Man in the Mirror, Heal the World. Across continents, people stood in silence. But even in that first wave of mourning, questions spread like wildfire. Why had there been such a long delay before calling for help? Why was an anesthetic like propofol in a home environment? And what had Dr. Conrad Murray really done or failed to do in those final moments? The police arrived at the Carrollwood mansion that same evening. They found bottles labeled propofol, lidocaine, diazepam, lorazepam, and midazolam. Some empty, some half full. The IV drip was still attached to the stand beside the bed. In the bathroom, detectives discovered syringes and oxygen tubing. One of them remarked, "This doesn't look like a bedroom. This looks like an operating room." Murray was questioned immediately. His story was simple, too simple. He said Michael had begged him for propofol that night. He claimed he had tried other medications first, but nothing worked. Finally, to help Michael sleep before his concert rehearsals, he gave him a small dose, just enough, he said, to help him rest. Then he claimed he left the room for a few minutes. In those few minutes, Michael Jackson stopped breathing. When Murray returned, he said he found Michael unresponsive. He tried to revive him, administered CPR, and called for help. But phone records contradicted that timeline. He hadn't called 911 right away. Instead, he made several personal calls first. The delay, perhaps 20 minutes or more, proved fatal. As detectives collected evidence, they began to see a disturbing pattern. Murray's medical bag contained not only propofol, but also other drugs, benzodiazepines, tranquilizers, painkillers, all mixed in a way that no responsible physician would ever administer. And there was another problem. Murray wasn't an anesthesiologist. He was a cardiologist, a heart doctor, not trained for deep sedation. The autopsy would later reveal that Michael Jackson's body contained lethal levels of propofol combined with multiple other sedatives. It wasn't just one mistake, it was a cascade of negligence. Still, to the public, all they knew was this: their idol was gone. Thousands gathered outside his home, holding candles and singing softly into the night. The gates were covered in flowers, handwritten notes, photos, and messages. Around the world, impromptu vigils sprang up in Tokyo, Berlin, London, Sao Paulo. The grief felt communal, but underneath it was confusion. Was this really an accident? Or had fame itself and the machinery that surrounded Michael Jackson finally devoured him? As one of his friends later said, Michael didn't die on June 25th. He'd been dying for a long time, piece by piece, pill by pill. The stage lights were gone. The applause had faded. All that remained was silence and a single haunting question echoing through Los Angeles. What killed the king of pop? The answer was about to unravel layer by layer in one of the most controversial investigations in entertainment history. In the hours following Michael Jackson's death, the corridors of UCLA Medical Center were tense and surreal. The family wept in disbelief. His children, too young to grasp the enormity of it, clung to relatives as camera flashes pierced the night outside. But even before the world had time to mourn, investigators were already on the move. The Los Angeles Police Department's Robbery Homicide Division took control of the case. For them, this wasn't just another celebrity tragedy, it was a potential criminal act. The circumstances surrounding Michael's death were too unusual, too inconsistent to be written off as natural. Detectives combed through the Carrollwood mansion again the next morning. The bedroom was sealed, its sterile chaos frozen in time. On the nightstand, vials of propofol, half-empty bottles of lorazepam, and prescription labels bearing Murray's name. Some bottles had been hidden in a closet bag, others tucked into boxes as if someone had tried to clean up before calling for help. And the key question everyone kept asking: why did it take Dr. Conrad Murray so long to call 911? Phone records showed that instead of dialing emergency services immediately after finding Michael unresponsive, Murray had spent nearly half an hour on the phone talking to a girlfriend in Houston, answering business calls, even leaving voicemail messages. The more detectives uncovered, the less sense it made. When questioned again, Murray insisted he had done everything he could. He said he had been monitoring Michael continuously, that he'd only stepped out briefly to use the bathroom. He claimed that when he returned, Jackson wasn't breathing and that he tried to revive him immediately. But the timeline didn't fit. Not with the phone data, not with the statements from the house staff. One security guard, Alberto Alvarez, later told police that Murray had instructed him to help clean up vials and hide medical equipment before calling 911. Alvarez recalled seeing an IV bag hanging by the bed, filled with a milky substance, the propofol. That single observation would become one of the most damning pieces of evidence in the case. Meanwhile, the coroner's office began its work. The autopsy lasted hours. When it was over, the results confirmed what many had suspected: Michael Jackson's death was no simple cardiac event. The toxicology report revealed a fatal concentration of propofol in his blood combined with several sedatives. The combination was lethal. The medical examiner classified the death as homicide. Not murder in the emotional sense, but in the legal one. Someone's negligence, recklessness, or incompetence had directly caused it. The findings sent shockwaves through the Jackson family. Catherine Jackson, his mother, demanded answers. LaToya publicly declared that her brother had been murdered. Fans, meanwhile, were torn, grief giving way to anger. Outside the mansion, the gates overflowed with flowers and signs. But amid the mourning, a darker energy was forming: the desire for accountability. As the investigation deepened, Murray's behavior came under intense scrutiny. His financial troubles surfaced quickly. He was hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. Several of his medical offices were facing lawsuits for unpaid rent. He was behind on child support. To some investigators, it painted a troubling picture, a doctor who needed money badly. And the timing couldn't have been more convenient. Michael Jackson's concert promoter, AEG Live, had hired Murray for the This Is It tour, agreeing to pay him $150,000 per month to be Michael's personal physician. The contract, however, had never been fully executed. Murray was never actually paid a dime, but he was already acting as Jackson's full-time doctor. To law enforcement, that made everything more suspicious. They began interviewing everyone around Michael, his assistants, his security team, his makeup artist, his choreographer, even his chef. Each person painted the same portrait. Michael was exhausted, anxious, and struggling to sleep. He had been rehearsing for hours every day, sometimes until 2 or 3 a.m. He would come home drained, physically trembling. Then he'd beg for medication. His personal chef, Kai Chase, told investigators that every night before preparing his dinner, she saw Dr. Murray carrying oxygen tanks upstairs. He'd go up there with them almost every night, she said. It became clear that what was happening in that mansion wasn't routine medical care. It was a pattern, one that blurred the line between treatment and dependency. Murray had told police that he was simply helping Michael rest. But medical experts disagreed. They called his actions grossly reckless. Propofol is an anesthetic that depresses the central nervous system. It slows breathing and heart rate to dangerous levels unless continuously monitored with hospital-grade equipment, things Murray didn't have. When the LAPD searched Murray's storage units, they found shipping invoices for large quantities of Propofol, 255 vials in all. The orders were placed under Murray's name, delivered to his girlfriend's address, not a clinic. Why would a cardiologist need that much anesthetic? To prosecutors, the answer was clear: because one patient, Michael Jackson, demanded it, and Murray had agreed, whether out of loyalty, money, or desperation. The evidence pointed toward gross negligence. But negligence wasn't enough to prove murder. The legal question became, was this a tragic accident caused by poor judgment, or was it a criminal act? The Jackson family wanted justice. Fans wanted someone to blame. The LAPD, under public pressure, pushed harder. By August 2009, the Los Angeles County coroner officially ruled the death a homicide due to acute propofol intoxication, with other sedatives contributing. The case was turned over to the district attorney. But the delay in bringing charges fueled conspiracy theories. Some believed Murray was just a scapegoat. Others thought there were higher powers involved: corporations, promoters, insurers, all with billions at stake if Michael failed to perform. Behind the scenes, the machinery of the entertainment industry was already spinning. AEG Live stood to lose hundreds of millions from the cancelled tour, but they also stood to gain from insurance claims from the This Is It film, from renewed interest in Jackson's catalog. And so even as police prepared their case against Dr. Murray, the lines between justice and profit blurred. Michael Jackson, even in death, remained a commodity. The investigation would soon reveal just how deep that truth ran and how many people had chosen to look the other way while the king of pop slowly self-destructed. By early 2010, the investigation into Michael Jackson's death had become one of the most scrutinized criminal inquiries in modern entertainment history. Every new piece of evidence, every leaked document, every statement from the Jackson family ignited global headlines. Fans camped outside courthouses holding signs that read, "Justice for Michael." Conspiracy videos flooded the internet. Talk shows dissected every inconsistency. Some swore Michael had been murdered deliberately. Others claimed he had orchestrated his own death to escape fame. But beneath all the noise, detectives focused on one man, Dr. Conrad Murray. For months, Murray had remained silent, moving between states, hiring lawyers, and trying to salvage what remained of his reputation. When the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office finally charged him with involuntary manslaughter in February 2010, the world exhaled, not because it brought closure, but because it confirmed what so many already suspected: Michael Jackson's death had not been natural. The charge meant that prosecutors believed Murray had caused Jackson's death through reckless and negligent conduct, though without intent to kill. It carried a maximum sentence of 4 years in prison. Still, to millions of fans, it didn't feel like enough. At the arraignment, Murray stood before the court, flanked by lawyers' cameras flashing like lightning all around him. He pleaded not guilty. Behind him sat members of the Jackson family, stoic, cold, and silent. Outside, the crowd chanted, "Murderer, murderer." The trial wouldn't begin until the following year, but in that long wait, a mountain of evidence accumulated. Detectives obtained Murray's phone logs, text messages, and computer files. They interviewed his staff, his patients, even his girlfriends. What emerged was a portrait of a man drowning in debt, willing to do anything to please his most famous patient. Murray had been promised a staggering monthly salary by AEG Live, a figure he had never earned before in his career. To him, Michael Jackson was not just a patient, he was a lifeline. But the more investigators examined their relationship, the more disturbing it became. Michael's dependency on sleep aids had evolved into a full-scale medical addiction. Multiple former doctors confirmed that he had sought propofol treatments for years. He believed it was the only thing that could grant him real sleep. One doctor had refused warning him of the risks. Another said Michael became obsessed with the idea, insisting it was safe. By 2009, Dr. Murray was the only physician willing to comply. Emails from AEG executives revealed that they were aware of Michael's health issues and his dependency on medication. One message dated just days before his death showed growing concern. "MJ is not in great shape. We need to get him to a psychologist or something. He's deteriorating." But they also pressed Murray to ensure Michael showed up to rehearsals. Their investment depended on it. The deeper the investigation went, the clearer it became that Michael was trapped between corporate pressure addiction and the physical toll of years in the spotlight. Murray's lawyers tried to frame their client as a scapegoat. They claim Michael had self-administered the fatal dose of propofol while Murray was out of the room. They argued that Jackson was desperate for sleep and took more than his doctor intended. But prosecutors countered with science and logic. The levels of propofol in his system could not have been self-inflicted in such a short window of time. Murray had left him unsupervised after giving the drug without vital sign monitors or emergency equipment. That they argued was not an accident. It was criminal negligence. Meanwhile, the Jackson family faced their own private torment. Catherine, his mother, tried to shield the children, Prince Paris and Blanket, from the media storm, but it was impossible. They had lost their father under incomprehensible circumstances, and now the entire world dissected every detail of how it happened. Jermaine Jackson spoke publicly, calling the situation heartbreaking. LaToya said, "They killed him. They killed my brother for money." And in a way, that sentiment wasn't far from the truth, if not literally, then morally. Because while the investigation dragged on, another empire was being built around Michael's death. His posthumous film, This Is It, premiered in October 2009. It became one of the highest-grossing concert documentaries of all time, grossing over $260 million worldwide. Albums were reissued, box sets, released merchandise sold. The estate's value skyrocketed. Michael's death ironically became the resurrection of his fortune. Behind closed doors, the LAPD continued piecing together their final case against Murray. Forensic analysts reconstructed the timeline of Michael's final hours, confirming that the dosage of propofol administered could only have come from Murray. Even more troubling were the attempts to conceal evidence. Murray had ordered a bodyguard to bag up medicine bottles and remove them before paramedics arrived. He had also failed to inform medical responders that propofol was involved, a detail that could have changed the course of their treatment. For investigators, this was more than negligence, it was deceit. When the case finally went to trial in 2011, the courtroom became a media circus. Reporters from around the world filled every seat. Fans lined the sidewalks with signs, some demanding justice, others pleading for peace. Inside, the prosecution laid out a meticulous case. Murray had given Michael Jackson a lethal dose of propofol without proper monitoring, then delayed calling 911. He had ordered massive amounts of the drug shipped to his girlfriend's apartment, not a licensed clinic. He had failed to keep proper medical records. They argued that this wasn't a single mistake, but a pattern of reckless behavior, one that had built over weeks and culminated in tragedy. The defense countered with a narrative of compassion gone wrong, that Murray had been trying to wean Michael off the drug, that his only crime was caring too much for a patient he couldn't control. As witnesses testified, medical experts, paramedics, bodyguards, even Michael's chef, a clear image emerged of a man in slow collapse, surrounded by people who either couldn't or wouldn't stop him. And sitting at the center of it all was Conrad Murray, stoic, expressionless, a man whose silence now carried the weight of a global tragedy. After 6 weeks of testimony, closing arguments painted two worlds. The prosecution's world was one of greed and negligence, a doctor who had placed money above morality. The defense's world was one of tragedy and dependence, a man trapped in the orbit of a superstar's impossible needs. The jury deliberated for less than 9 hours. On November 7th, 2011, the verdict was read aloud. Dr. Conrad Robert Murray, guilty of involuntary manslaughter. Outside, the crowd erupted screams, tears, relief. Some shouted justice for Michael, others wept silently. Inside, Murray's face did not change. His license was revoked. He was later sentenced to 4 years in prison, of which he would serve 2. The family felt vindicated but not healed. Justice had come but too late, because nothing could bring back the man the world had lost or erase the truth that his death was the final note in a song that had begun decades earlier when fame first took hold of a young boy from Gary, Indiana. The trial was over, but the questions and the ghosts remained. When the verdict was announced on November 7, 2011, the world reacted with a mix of triumph and sorrow. Justice had a name, Dr. Conrad Murray, but it didn't feel like victory. Outside the courthouse, fans cheered and sobbed. They held up posters of Michael, smiling hands raised to the sky. "We did it," Michael, one woman cried. "They can't hurt you anymore." But inside the family car that carried Katherine Jackson away, there were no cheers, only silence. For her and for Michael's children, nothing about that day felt like closure. The man responsible for his son's death would serve 2 years. Michael, meanwhile, would never again walk through a doorway, sing to his kids, or feel the roar of a crowd. Justice had spoken, yes, but it had whispered, not thundered. And as the years passed, a deeper truth began to emerge. Dr. Murray was not the only one who had failed Michael Jackson. He was simply the last in a long line of people who had promised to care for him, protect him, and instead help destroy him piece by piece for money, for fame, for proximity to power. The official story of Michael Jackson's death was simple, acute, propofol intoxication administered by Dr. Murray in a home setting without proper monitoring. But the unofficial story, the one that fans, journalists, and insiders whispered about for years, was far more complex. To understand that story, we must look not just at what happened on June 25, 2009, but at what led to it. Michael's relationship with sleep, or the lack of it, had become pathological. For years he had begged doctors to help him rest. He once told a nurse, "You don't understand. I can't turn off my mind." By 2009, his insomnia was so severe that ordinary medication no longer worked. He was trapped in a cycle of rehearsals, anxiety, and exhaustion. The upcoming This Is It concerts loomed like a tidal wave, 50 shows that demanded perfection. He told people close to him, "If I don't sleep, I can't sing. If I can't sing, they'll kill me." It was hyperbole, but not entirely wrong. Behind the glossy posters and sold-out arenas, there were massive financial stakes. AEG Live, the promoter, had invested millions. Insurers had underwritten the shows with clauses that would pay out in the event of cancellation, including death. Emails uncovered years later showed that AEG executives were concerned about Michael's health, even questioning his ability to perform. Yet the pressure to push forward was relentless. One internal email dated just 2 weeks before Michael's death read chillingly, "He's not in shape, but we can't stop now. The schedule's locked. He has to make it." The truth is that Michael Jackson had become less a person and more a product, one that too many people depended on for income. And when a man becomes a product, his well-being becomes secondary to profit. After the trial, new investigations explored the broader ecosystem that surrounded him, the agents, promoters, doctors, and handlers who had enabled his dependency. Many had seen his decline. Few had intervened. Former aides recalled seeing him slur his words, stumble, or forget conversations. One bodyguard admitted he once found Michael semi-conscious, surrounded by pill bottles. When asked why he didn't alert anyone, he said quietly, "Because if I did, I'd lose my job." In Hollywood, silence is often the price of survival. But even as the truth of that ecosystem came to light, something remarkable happened. The world began to rediscover the man behind the myth. In the months following his death, his music flooded the airwaves again. Albums re-entered the charts. Thriller sold millions more copies. Man in the Mirror became an anthem of redemption. For a new generation, Michael Jackson wasn't the scandal-plagued recluse of his final years. He was the genius, the artist who moonwalked across boundaries, who spoke of unity and healing, who tried to make the world a little less cruel through song. And yet that rediscovery carried a haunting undertone because the same adoration that fueled his rise had also fed his downfall. In the years following his death, Dr. Murray granted interviews from prison, insisting he wasn't to blame. He described himself as a victim of circumstance, claiming that Michael had begged him nightly for the drug that would finally let him rest. "He cried for sleep," Murray said. "He was in pain. I was trying to help him." But most people didn't believe him, because real help means saying no. And no one had said no to Michael Jackson for a very long time. After Murray's release from jail in 2013, he lived in obscurity, stripped of his license and reputation. Yet he continued to speak publicly, painting himself as misunderstood. To many, it was another betrayal, another echo of the pattern that had haunted Michael's life those who claim to care always finding a way to benefit from his name. Meanwhile, the Jackson family waged its own battle this time against AEG Live. They filed a wrongful death lawsuit alleging that the company had been negligent in hiring and supervising Murray, prioritizing profits over Michael's health. The trial, which unfolded in 2013, offered a devastating glimpse into the machinery of fame. Emails, contracts, and witness testimony revealed the immense pressure Michael was under. Rehearsal footage showed him frail, his voice cracking, his energy fading. One producer admitted, "We were scared. We knew he wasn't ready." But there was too much money on the line to stop. In the end, the jury sided with AEG Live. They ruled that while Murray had been negligent, the company had not been directly responsible for hiring him. It was a bitter outcome for the Jacksons, and for fans who saw it as another example of power shielding itself from accountability. By then, 4 years had passed since Michael's death. The headlines had faded, the vigils had stopped, but the grief and the fascination never truly left. People still debated the meaning of his death. Some said it was the inevitable cost of genius, that extraordinary talent comes with extraordinary suffering. Others saw it as proof of something darker, a system that consumes its brightest stars until there's nothing left but the glow of their legacy. Michael Jackson's story had always been one of contradictions. He was childlike and visionary shy, yet magnetic, deeply lonely, yet worshipped by millions. He wanted love, but found isolation. He wanted rest, but found oblivion. In the end, the world mourned not just a man, but the innocence he represented, the idea that someone so gifted, so pure in his artistry, could live among us without being broken by the weight of fame. After his death, one of his notebooks was found among his possessions. In it, written in a shaky hand, were the words, "I want to be loved truly, not for what I give, but for who I am." It was a line that felt less like a diary entry and more like a eulogy for himself, because that ultimately was the truth inside the death of Michael Jackson. It wasn't just a story of drugs or negligence or legal battles. It was the story of a man who gave everything, his childhood, his body, his peace, to a world that never knew how to give anything back. And when he finally asked for the simplest thing, sleep, the world gave him silence instead. In the years since Michael Jackson's death, his image has lingered everywhere in murals and magazine covers, in the echoes of his music, in the steps of dancers who still mimic his impossible grace. Time has softened some of the outrage, blurred some of the scandal, and what remains is both beautiful and tragic. The story of a man who could make the world move, yet never find stillness himself. The official documents say it plainly: cause of death, acute propofol intoxication. But that line on paper can't capture the truth. It doesn't explain the weight of the spotlight, the loneliness of global fame, or the machinery that surrounded him, a system that rewarded obedience, punished boundaries, and refused to let him rest. Michael Jackson's death didn't happen in a moment. It was the end of a slow descent, one that began the moment the world decided that Michael Jackson was no longer a person, but a phenomenon. When he was 5 years old, he stood on a stage and sang, "I'll be there." The crowd roared. He smiled shyly, as though unaware that the promise in those words to always be there for others would become a curse he could never escape. For half a century, he gave everything. Every note, every dance step, every piece of himself. And the world took it and wanted more. When he tried to retreat, the tabloids dragged him back. When he spoke about pain, people laughed. When he sought help, the wrong people answered. By 2009, Michael Jackson was a man encased in myth, fragile, frightened, yet still trying to perform one last miracle. Those around him saw his exhaustion, but mistook it for weakness. They treated his desperation for sleep as an inconvenience, not a cry for help. And so he was left in the care of a man who should have protected him, but instead became the final link in a chain of dependence that had begun decades before. Dr. Conrad Murray's conviction was meant to mark the end of that story, but it didn't. It only revealed how many others shared the blame: managers, doctors, corporations, and a culture that worships fame until it destroys the person behind it. The aftermath of Michael Jackson's death reshaped the way we talk about celebrity mortality. It forced questions that few wanted to ask. How many of our idols are quietly suffering behind the facade of perfection? How many have been medicated into silence by those paid to keep them functioning? And how far will an industry go to protect its profit before it protects its people? In the years following his death, the music industry saw echoes of his story, repeat artists collapsing from exhaustion, lost to addiction, or fading under the same unbearable pressures. The lessons from Michael's tragedy linger, but they often go unlearned. Still, amidst the sorrow, there is something enduring, something that refuses to die: his music. The beats of Billie Jean, the defiance of they don't care about us, the hope of heal the world, the introspection of man in the mirror, songs that in their own way revealed everything he couldn't say aloud, songs that exposed his soul, vulnerable, searching, luminous. When he sang, if you want to make the world a better place, take a look at yourself and make a change, he wasn't just preaching to others, he was pleading with himself and with us. In that plea lies the real legacy of Michael Jackson, not the headlines or the scandals or the courtroom verdicts, but the unshakable reminder that behind every legend is a person who bleeds aches and dreams like the rest of us. Today his star still glows on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, its edges worn by the touch of millions who've knelt to trace his name. Fans still visit his childhood home in Gary, Indiana. They leave notes and flowers whispering thanks to the boy who never stopped giving. To the world he was the king of pop. To those who loved him, he was simply Michael. And to history he remains both a man who showed us what human creativity could reach and what human cost it could demand. In the end, the truth about Michael Jackson's death isn't confined to a courtroom or a toxicology report. It's written in the silence that follows when the music stops, in the collective gasp of a world that realized it had asked too much of one man. Because what they don't want you to know is not just how he died, but why. He didn't die from a single dose of propofol. He died from exhaustion, from being consumed by a world that loved him only as long as he performed, only as long as he shimmered under the lights. He died from the weight of being Michael Jackson. And though his body is gone, his spirit remains everywhere in the rhythm of a drum beat, the tilt of a hat, the gloved hand pointing skyward. For all his pain, his voice still carries. It crosses generations and continents, whispering something timeless and fragile, a truth he spent his life trying to teach. That greatness without peace is not a gift, but a burden. That love without understanding is not love at all. And that even kings in the end just want to rest.